Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone. So in this video we're going to be continuing our read-along of The Secret Zoo, The Final Fight. And last time we finished off, we completed Chapter 2, so we'll be jumping into Chapter 3 today. And as always guys, I hope you enjoy the read-aloud today, and well, let's go ahead and jump into it. Chapter 3, A Previous Portal. As the scouts led Blizzard across Noah's backyard, a private place surrounded by tall trees, they opened the right pockets in their Specter pants and came out of their camouflage like figures from a fog. Blizzard made his way past Fort Scout, branches snapping beneath his paws, and then kicked through a wind-blown pile of fallen leaves. A shed sat in the back corner of Noah's yard, partially concealed by overgrown shrubs and the low limbs of the few trees. Noah walked to it and quietly opened the double doors. The space was crowded with tools, boxes, and ceramic pots. The scouts went inside and pushed things around to make room. Then they stepped back into the yard. Blizzard, knowing what to do, walked in the shed, the floor creaking and groaning beneath his weight. Then he found enough space to turn around and face the front. "This is all we got," Noah said. He reached in and patted Blizzard's head. "Guys, what's going on?" Richie asked. "Let's check from Fort Scout." Noah briefly turned his attention back to Blizzard, saying, "Blizz, you'll be safe here until we can figure things out. We have to go right now, but we'll check on you." The big bear lowered his head and grunted. Noah touched Blizzard a final time and then closed the shed doors. The friends headed across the yard and climbed into their tree fort. Megan found the binoculars and looked out across the Clarksville Zoo. "See anything?" Noah asked. Instead of answering, Megan handed over the binoculars. Noah positioned the lenses before his eyes and stared out. Most of the lights at the zoo were still off. Noah could see some things: the silhouettes of Metropolis, the water park, and the Forest of Flight, but it was too dark to make out much detail. He tried to locate the animals and couldn't. Then he gave the binoculars to Ella, who took a turn looking before handing them over to Richie. Noah tried to figure out what was going on. He thought out of the fog, the giraffes, and the way the scouts couldn't contact the descenders with their headsets. Degraff is taking over the zoos, the Clarksville Zoo and the Secret Zoo. The scouts traded uneasy glances, and it was clear to Noah that they agreed. Noah headed for the spiral staircase, saying, "Let's talk inside." They made their way out of the tree fort and into the house. Noah checked the clock. It still had a half hour before his parents got home. In the living room, they had dropped onto the couch and chairs, exhausted. Megan said, "What do we do?" Noah thought about the descenders, the Specters, Mr. Darby, their animal friends. No one was here to help. "Should we tell our parents?" Megan asked. "The police?" Noah wondered what it would mean to expose the Secret Zoo. And the magic. It would be no longer safe. "I don't know. Maybe we should..." He glanced up the staircase to his bedroom. He had heard something, a board creaking. "I heard it too," Richie said, having noticed Noah's interest. Noah glanced at Ella and Megan. You could tell by their wide eyes that they had heard the same thing. Another board creaked, louder this time. "Someone's up there," Ella said. Megan suddenly jumped to her feet and headed for the staircase with quick, cautious strides. "Meg! Wait," Noah whispered. But he was already off the couch and following his sister, along with Ella and Richie. As the four of them slowly headed up the staircase, something clunked in Noah's room. The scouts paused, traded worried looks, then finished making their way up the stairs. They gathered around Noah's open bedroom door and listened. Another board creaked, and Noah realized the sounds were coming from his walk-in closet. He instantly recalled what had happened in there just days ago. The portal, Charlie Red, the monkeys. Noah had been attacked. The room was quiet and dark. As the scouts cautiously stepped inside, they saw a silhouette near the closet doorway. A man, a lanky man whose hair was standing straight up. Ella gasped and grabbed Noah's arm. The man walked over to Noah's desk and turned on the lamp, revealing that he was actually a teenage boy. He had a crooked mohawk and round goggles with tinted lenses and a wide rubber strap. He wore filthy blue overalls and a t-shirt that had once been white. The scouts had met him before. "Zach?" Noah said. Zach belonged to the Technicals, a group of geniuses who built machines for mechanics and magic. "What are you... How did you... Your parents home?" Zach asked. Noah shook his head. "Don't freak, bro," Zach said. "At least not until you see what I brought with me." More noises came from Noah's closet. Then an old man with a long gray beard and a flowing velvet jacket stepped out into the room. Mr. Darby. He stood up straight and nodded as he used his palm to sweep off dust off of his jacket. The closet floorboards creaked again. Then a young teenager stepped out. He wore a black leather jacket, and his long bangs dangled in his eyes. Sam, the leader of the Descenders who safeguarded the perimeter of the Clarksville Zoo. Sam said, "Noah, what's the best way out of here?" "Out of where?" "Your house," Sam said, as if it should have been obvious. "This is your house, right?" Then Noah nodded. "Then how do you get out of it?" He looked around again and then motioned at the window. "This?" Noah shook his head and pointed to the hallway. "The front door is downstairs." As Sam headed that way, he said, "I'll dispatch the troops. We'll set up a perimeter and bring down the gateways at the zoo." "All of them," Mr. Darby said. "Block all access to our world." "What?" Noah said. "Close the portals? What are you talking about?" "Drastic measures for dire circumstances. I can't avoid it." "But you can't close the portals," Ella said. More noises in the closet, and a young teenage girl stepped out. She had wild blonde hair, clipped to different lengths, wore purple leather boots that stopped near her knees, and she was chomping a piece of gum. Hannah. She casually nodded at the scouts and then followed Sam out into the hall and down the stairs. Noah turned his attention to the closet. From his angle, he couldn't see into it. "How?" Zach said. "Remember that velvet curtain that Charlie Red used to get into your closet? The one that you gave to us?" "Of course," Noah said. "Your coordinates were still locked in. Me and a group of techies were able to re-engineer it." Mr. Darby looked at Zach and said, "Most resourceful, these young men." Though Noah couldn't see into his closet, he knew what was now at the back of it, a velvet curtain attached above a large hole in the wall where the heating vent had been. Something small shot out of the closet. A bright blue bird flew around the room and then landed on Noah's shoulder. Marlowe. Noah positioned his head for the best view of the kingfisher. "You okay?" Marlowe chirped once to show that he was. Noah turned to Mr. Darby and said, "The other animals, are they all right?" "Some," the old man said, "but things are very uncertain at this point." Another person walked out of the closet, an attractive girl with long dark hair that looped her ears and trailed down her back. She wore a blue leather jacket and fingerless gloves. Gloves, Noah knew, that could sprout 10-inch quills. Solana. She winked at Noah and ran into the hall, followed by 3 Descenders Noah didn't recognize. A big man with a shiny bald head and mounded muscles stepped into the room. Tank. When he got close to Noah, he held his massive fist out toward him, and Noah lightly fist-bumped Tank's walnut-sized knuckles. 6 new Descenders came out of the walk-in closet, one after another. 2 Specters, Alakshi and Lily, appeared. They nodded at the scouts, and they headed into the hall. Noah went to the window and looked out. Keeping to the shadows, the secret citizens were heading off in different directions. "Has he taken over the Clarksville Zoo?" Mr. Darby asked. "Huh?" said Noah. "The animals. Has Degraff gotten to them with his magic?" Noah told Mr. Darby about the giraffes. "And the security guards?" Noah nodded. "That means the Specters are his, too. Most, at least." The scouts told Mr. Darby about the tarantulas at their school. Looking worried, the old man simply listened. "How did this happen?" Richie asked. "A storm," Mr. Darby said. "Degraff conjured a storm to infect us with his dark magic." "Is the city of species safe?" Mr. Darby shook his head. He gestured to the descenders still coming from Noah's closet, saying, "We managed to escape into the basement of an old museum in the city of species, the Institute of Light. Some animals did, too. Gifted, mostly." He motioned to Zach and added, "Our young friend had a brilliant idea. The curtain that once opened to your room was being kept in the museum. He did some work with it and hung it in the basement. Now," Mr. Darby gestured around him, "here we are. And now we must close the portals to your world before Degraff and his growing army can use them." "But why not fight?" Megan asked. "The Descenders can track down Degraff and—" "The storm's dark magic is too powerful. Our Descenders would only become Degraff's minions if they stayed in the shadows for the clouds for long." Noah looked at the closet again. A man with a shaggy beard stepped into his room, and then a woman with short spiked hair. Noah watched them pass. Then he took a few steps forward, and on his shoulder, Marlowe chirped, as if warning Noah to be careful. Noah peered into the long, narrow closet and saw a curtain the size of a beach towel dangling along the wall. Crushed drywall lay beneath it. As Noah watched, the curtain bulged outward and then slipped off the body of a teenage boy in a hooded jacket. The teenager brushed past Noah on his way out of the room. Then Evie, the leader of the Specters, appeared. Noah backed away from the scene, which was suddenly too much to believe. The portals, the magic, the secret zoo. A polar bear was sleeping in his shed, and people were entering his world through a portal in his closet. "Mr. Darby!" Noah flinched at the voice, which had come directly into his ear. Sam was talking over the radio waves everyone shared. "We got a problem. We're at Clarksville Zoo. The gateways? We can't close them." Mr. Darby touched the transmit button on his earpiece and said, "What do you mean you can't? The curtains won't come down." "How many have you tried?" 4, 5, maybe?" Mr. Darby seemed to think about this. He shared a look with Noah, Tank, and a few Descenders. "Keep trying. Go to every one, and do it quickly." "Yes, sir," Sam said, and then the radio waves went silent. "We had the same problem at Giraffic Jam." Mr. Darby raised an eyebrow and stared at Megan. "Then Degraff has done something to cause this," he said. "He altered their magic." Mr. Darby stared at a spot on the floor. Then he said, "Sam, get back to Noah's. The rest of you, I want you to surround Clarksville Zoo. If you can't bring down the portals, stay and guard them. If you see anything, let us know immediately." "Roger," Sam said. Then to the Descenders he added, "Everyone, we clear?" A few Descenders responded that they were. Then the radio waves went silent again. Noah shook his head, barely able to believe all the things that was going on around him. Descenders were surrounding the Clarksville Zoo, where the portals were being kept open by the Shadowist. Fear washed over Noah as he realized the secret zoo was going to war, and it was doing so in his neighborhood. "Are you sure about this?" Noah asked. Mr. Darby raised an eyebrow over his dark sunglasses. No, not at all. But I'm at a loss, Noah. You must understand that. Noah nodded. Then he glanced at the clock on his desk. His parents wouldn't be home for at least another 20 minutes. The secret citizens had stopped coming through the portal, and the only people in the house other than the scouts were Mr. Darby, Tank, Evie, Zach, and Sam, who'd come back inside. Marlowe was still perched on Noah's shoulder. Mr. Darby had just shared his idea for keeping the scouts safe. He wanted to post someone at each of their houses. Degraff could attack your world at any moment, Mr. Darby said. My first priority is your protection. Noah glanced at Sam, the person Mr. Darby had ordered to stay at Megan and Noah's. Sam can stay in my closet, he said, and he can step into the portal if he needs to hide. And Evie's coming to my house, Ella asked. Evie looked out from behind her long bangs with one eye and softly nodded. It shouldn't be too hard to conceal her from your mother, Mr. Darby said, referring to the Specters' power to camouflage. Then he looked at Richie and added, Are you comfortable with Tank staying with you? Richie nodded. Is there a place you can hide from your parents, if needed? Yeah, Richie said. My room. It's really that messy. Mr. Darby walked toward the middle of the group, saying, Okay, it's decided then. I'll head back to the City of Species with Zach. The Technicals have work to do. On what? Noah asked. Our best hope for stopping the animals from invading your world, Mr. Darby said. I'll explain later. Zach, come with me. As the pair began to walk around toward the closet, Noah said, What about the portal in my room? It opens to the Institute of Light. We'll keep it guarded. Mr. Darby took a few steps more and then added, Use your headsets to communicate. But remember, the airwaves can't pass through the portals. Noah nodded. If we need to tell you something, I'll send a note with Marlowe. Mr. Darby paused at the open doorway to the closet and looked back at the scouts. If nothing happens tonight, see if you can find out how those tarantulas got into your school. A portal, maybe. It might mean Degraff is using his new powers to open secret gateways to more places. Noah nodded. If you find a portal, try to take it down. Mr. Darby turned to leave, and Ella called out his name, the old man looking back, saying, Yes. Our friends, Podgy and Little Bighorn, all the others, are they safe? Mr. Darby frowned. I don't know, Ella. They're not in the Institute of Light, and I don't know how much of the secret zoo is now under Degraff's control. But they could be somewhere else, right? Richie said. A building? Another basement? Yes, Mr. Darby said. But let's not make that our concern now. We have the world to consider, yours and ours. The room went quiet, and the scouts traded worried glances. This is it, Mr. Darby said in a heavy voice. The final fight. Chapter 4. Secret Sleepovers. Tank walked into Richie's oversized closet and began clearing a spot on the floor. You're not thinking about building another portal, are you? Richie asked. Tank looked at Richie, realized he was joking, and went back to work saying, Give me a hand. Your parents could be home any... He picked up a white toy robot with blue markings. What the heck is this? R2-D2. R2 what to? Star Wars. You know? Then Richie realized Tank didn't know. He slowly shook his head saying, You really miss out on some stuff. Tank raised one eyebrow, seemed to consider this, and then tossed R2-D2 into the corner. Richie helped move things around, and before long a spot was clear. Tank took a seat, his back against the wall. Richie did the same opposite of him. Will your parents come in? Tank asked. Not without knocking, Richie said. He stared at Tank, his bald head, his broad shoulders, the web of scars on his hands. You're in my room? Richie said. Do you have any idea how weird that is? Tank nodded. As he looked around the closet, Richie followed his gaze. A stack of clothes, board games, old toys, and electrical gadgets. So this is Richie's life. Yeah, sorta. Tank smiled. Being a kid is good to you, huh? Richie shrugged. Sometimes White Walt puts me in a locker. Who? That bully at your school? Richie nodded and looked at his feet to avoid Tank's gaze. But other than that, it's pretty good. I have Noah. He's my best friend. Tank smiled. Yeah, I kind of noticed. Is Mr. Darby yours? Mr. D? I guess so. He's best friend to a lot of people. Animals, too. The two became quiet. Richie remembered the security guards in the Clarksville Zoo, what Degraff's magic had done to them. Then he pictured the giraffe. Tank, he said. I'm scared. Richie, expecting to be told not to worry, flinched when Tank said, I am too, bub. The front of the door of the house creaked open, and Richie could hear his mother whispering to his father. He quickly got out of his closet, turned off the lights, and crawled into bed with his Spectre pants still on. Try to get some sleep, kid, Tank whispered. Will you? Not likely. Richie realized something. The Descenders, Tank, they sometimes went days without sleeping. See you tomorrow, Tank added. If not sooner. And Richie, knowing what that meant, knowing that Degraff's army could strike at any moment, closed his eyes and worried about the rest of the night would bring. Evie, Ella said. She looked around her bedroom, adding, Where are you? Over by the dresser, Evie seemed to take form. Her arms, her legs, her black boots. That meant her chameleons were crawling into her pocket. One last chameleon was gone. Evie appeared fully. She crossed her arms and looked around at Ella's pink bedsheets, pink pillows, and pink drapes. Cool, right? Ella asked. Evie shrugged. Pink. Where's my spot if I need to sleep? Ella realized how messy things were. She walked beside her bed and kicked through the stuff on the floor. Clothes, cleats, her grass-stained soccer uniform. After a few seconds, a space opened up on the carpet. She went to her closet, grabbed her sleeping bag, pink, unrolled it onto the floor. Ta-da! Evie nodded. Then she stood by the window and asked, Can you see the zoo from here? No, Ella said. My house is too far back. Evie looked in one direction, then another. To Ella, it seemed like she was scanning her neighbors' yards. Maybe she was looking for the tarsiers, the zoo animals that hid in the trees. Things will happen quickly now, Evie said. The animals, they'll march across your world. Not if we stop Degraff, Ella said. Stop? Kill, Ella said. Not like the word even though it was the right one. How do you kill someone who is already dead? Ella had wondered the same thing. All the scouts had. They had seen Degraff up close, his empty eye sockets and decaying flesh. Degraff was more than 100 years old, kept from death by dark magic. Silence. After almost a minute, Evie asked, What's it like? What's what like? Your world. Ella shrugged, even though Evie was still looking out the window and couldn't see her. Not so bad. We have problems, I guess. Is it worth dying for? Huh? Your world, Evie said. Is it worth dying for? Ella couldn't think of a thing to say. You may need to, Evie said. We all might. Ella still wanted to say something, but words felt impossible. Evie turned to Ella and frowned. You should call your friends. Tell them to leave their Spectre pants on in case the fight begins tonight. Ella thought of her friends, her family, and how badly she wanted to keep everyone safe. Then she reached up and touched the transmit button on her earpiece. You leaving those on? Sam asked. Huh? Noah said. Sam gestured to the Spectre pants Noah was wearing. Oh, Noah said as he glanced down at his legs. Ella had just given the scouts instructions to wear their Spectre pants to bed. Yeah. What's wrong with that? Sam shrugged. Nothing, I guess. You guess? I just have a problem with the way Specters do things. They hide. Descenders fight. I've seen Specters fight, Noah said. In Creepy Critters. He used the chameleons to build a mirage to hide the portal to the City of Species and nearly trapped Degraff, who'd escaped into the shadows at the last moment. Besides, I'm going to do whatever I can to protect myself, and it's not like we have a spare set of Descender gear lying around. I wouldn't be so sure of that. Sam tipped his head toward the closet. The portal? Tameron's in the Institute of Light. He's still injured from when Degraff held us prisoner. And then that frees up his gear. Tameron's backpack contained a powerful tail that could smash through concrete walls and thick panes of glass. In the secret Creepy Critters, Ella had used his tail to fight off the Shadowist. Degraff's coming for your world, Sam said. Do you want to hide or fight? Noah thought of all the times he'd fled from his problems. Charlie Red, the Sasquatches, Degraff, even Wide Walt, the bully at his school. How often had Noah not fought back? Leave him on if you want, Sam said. But let's go get Tameron's gear. Noah looked at his pants again. Wouldn't it be easier to be a Spectre and just fade away? I don't know. Come on, Sam said, and he took a step toward the closet. The Institute of Light. It's just over there. Noah looked toward Megan's room. What if something happens while we're gone? What if Degraff attacks? We'll be gone 15 minutes. 30 minutes at the most. A Descender. Someone who ignored the rules and lived by his own code. What would it be like to fight against Charlie Red and Degraff's growing army? What would it be like to win? Wait a minute, Noah said. He scooped up a wad of dirty clothes from his floor and stuffed it under the covers of his bed. What are you doing? Sam asked. Noah opened a pocket on his Spectre pants and chameleons crawled out, one after another, their bodies filled with the magic of the secret zoo. They made their way onto the mattress and spread along the pile of clothes. Noah shut his pocket once 20 chameleons were out, enough for what he wanted to do. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He concentrated on controlling the chameleons with his thoughts, just like he had in Creepy Critters. He imagined himself lying on his bed. What would his body look like beneath the covers? How would his head rest on his pillow? How would his lips be closed, or would they be parted? He opened his eyes and witnessed the magic of the secret zoo. The chameleons had made his wad of clothes look exactly like him. Noah in bed, a dull expression on his face, a perfect mirage of Noah sleeping. Nice, Sam said. Good thinking. The real Noah smiled, proud of his achievement. Marlowe sprang from his perch on the windowsill and touched down on Noah's shoulder. He glanced from Noah to the image on the bed, looking a bit confused. Noah took a step toward the closet. It felt good to be decisive. Marlowe chirped, as if to show support. Or maybe concern. Sam nodded. Then he turned and led Noah toward the Institute of Light. On his way, Noah saw his red hunting cap on the dresser. As he reached for it, he remembered how Solana sometimes teased him about the hat being childish. And it was, Noah thought. It made him look like a little kid. He grabbed the hat, considered it for a few seconds, and then tossed it back on the dresser. Then as he walked into the closet, he stuffed his hands in his jacket pockets the way the Descenders often did. Chapter 5. Back for the Pack. As the gateway curtain slipped down Noah's back, he entered a large room with a tall ceiling and concrete walls. The basement of the Institute of Light. The area was stocked with boxes and framed artwork. Bronze statues of people and animals were neatly organized on wire shelves, tags tied to their wrists, and wings and flippers. As many as 20 people were there, many of them sitting on the floor, their backs against the walls. Descenders. Noah guessed they had stayed back to protect one another at the secret zoo. A few were standing by the doorways, on guard and tense. Animals also crowded the room. Among them, Noah saw a lion, an ostrich, a koala, and a bear with her 2 cubs. Dozens of prairie dogs were crawling around, sniffing the floor and sitting up on their haunches. P-Dog was among them, and then when he saw Noah, he hurried over and moved his front legs up Noah's shin. Noah said, "P-Dog, you're okay," and patted the prairie dog's head. Then he glanced around for more of his animal friends. Little Bighorn, Podgy, Louie, Co, but didn't see any. "How long will this place be safe?" Noah asked. Sam shrugged. "A week? A day? An hour? Degraff hit us at any moment. We don't know his plan." Small spots of light dotted the air, blinking on and off. Fireflies, as many as 50. Noah didn't understand what they were doing in the basement of the museum, but it seemed normal enough for the secret zoo. A teenage boy was sitting with his back to the wall. His leg, which was in a cast, was stretched out in front of him. He wore a tight-knit cap with a short brim that partly masked his eyes. A large canvas bag was propped up against him. Tameron. The Descender met Noah's gaze. Noah rushed over and kneeled beside Tameron. He looked at the cast and asked, "Does it hurt?" Tameron shook his head. "Nah, man. Just stops me from being who I'm supposed to be." Noah knew what that meant. A Descender. Sam walked over and nodded at Tameron's backpack, saying, "How about we give Noah a chance?" Tameron tipped his head back so he could clearly see out from beneath the lower brim of his cap. He stared at Noah and said, "You think you're ready?" Noah glanced around the room and the other Descenders. They were watching, waiting to hear his answer. Even Marlowe, who was still on Noah's shoulder, seemed anxious to hear what Noah was going to say. I don't know," Noah said, regretting how the truth sounded. Tameron grabbed his backpack and slid it across the floor to Noah. "One way to find out." Noah picked up the large canvas backpack and was surprised by its weight. With its bulging pockets and numerous zippers, it looked like something issued by the army. The thought of what was inside made him nervous. "You won't fit in the rest of my gear," Tameron said, referring to his hat and jacket. Noah nodded. As he fed his arms through the straps of the pack, Marlowe flew off and landed on Tameron's shoulder. Through the backpack, Noah felt the hard curves of the tail against his spine. Tameron used his good leg to slowly stand. "See the cord in the straps?" Noah looked down. Near his shoulders, 2 cords emerged from the holes circled by velvet patches. "Pull them when you're ready." Noah held the cords in his hand. P-Dog, seeing what Noah was doing, scurried off. "It's gonna hurt," Tameron said. "I know," Noah said. "Ella told me. But not that bad, and just for a bit." Noah wondered what a bit, meant to a descender, and then gathered enough courage to pull the cords. 2 clicks sounded inside the pack, and then the weight dropped off his shoulders as the tail fell out. One end of it seemed to grab onto the base of his spine, and pricks of pain shot through his body. Light flashed across his vision, and he suddenly became aware of the muscles surrounding his tailbone. He peered over his shoulder and saw the long appendage stretched across the concrete. 15 feet long, it was covered in armored plates and studded with a jumble of spikes. The canvas pack was gone, fused to the back of his jacket. Noah suddenly lost his balance and dropped to one knee. His head swirled, and as more light flashed across his vision, the bronze statue seemed to glow. The magic of the secret zoo was inside him. He had the power of a descender for the first time. "Up," Tameron said. "It'll pass. Just power through it." Noah stood, staggered, and then he found his balance. After a few seconds, the pain was gone, and the dizziness stopped. He could sense the tail, all 15 feet of it. It felt like part of him was lying on the ground. "Now move it," Tameron said. Noah didn't need to ask how. He somehow knew he could move the tail just like any other part of his body. And when his thoughts went to the base of his spine, the tail curled and slid across the floor. He imagined the tail rising, and it went up and up, like a serpent from the ocean of a fantasy, brushing against an overhead rafter. The tail. His tail. Noah allowed it to fall and thumped against the floor. "Good," Tameron said. "Do it again. Better control this time." And he lifted the tail again. Fireflies swirled along with the air. He swung the tail back and forth, and each time it reversed direction, he had to brace himself to keep it from falling over. "The column," Tameron said, pointing off to the one side. "Hit it." The steel column that Tameron was referring to was as thick as the trunk of a big oak tree. Along with dozens of other columns, it helped support the basement ceiling. "What if it breaks?" "It won't," Tameron said. "Don't worry. The ceiling isn't going anywhere." Noah returned his thoughts to the base of his spine and whipped the tail, which glanced off the column and skipped across the floor. He stood there, surprised by the pain. It hurt." "Good," Tameron said. "I'd be worried if it didn't. Now hit it again." Noah swung, striking the column with a solid thump. The spiked edges lined in the steel. "Again," Tameron repeated. Noah swung his tail in the opposite direction, striking the other side of the column. "More power this time," Tameron said. "Put your body into it." Noah nodded. Then he swung his tail, which struck the column twice as hard. He winced at the way it hurt. "Ignore the pain," Tameron said. "Or better yet, accept it." Again, Noah swung his tail and carved more lines into the steel. 2 minutes passed. 3. As Noah continued to attack the column, the pain worsened. He hardly noticed, though. All his thoughts were on one thing. He was training as a descender. "Take a break," Tameron said. Noah struck the column a final time and then allowed his tail to fall limply to the ground. His chest heaved as he fought to catch his breath. Someone clapped him on the shoulder, and he turned and saw Sam standing beside him. "Not bad," Sam said. Noah nodded. He tried to sit on the ground and couldn't because of his tail. Tameron started laughing. "Good luck with that. Get out of that gear if you want to take a seat." Noah realized that even though the straps of the backpack had fused with the jacket, the cords were dangling near his shoulders. He pulled them and fought them to keep his balance as the tail retracted into the pack. Then he winced at the pain as the tail separated from his spine. He waited a few seconds to make sure nothing else was going to happen, and then he slipped his arms out of the shoulder straps and took a seat, still struggling for a breath. "How did it feel?" Noah waited a few seconds for more of his breath to return. "Good," Like, like I was lashing out. At what? He thought about it. I don't know. Everything. And nothing. It felt primal, Sam said. No one wasn't sure what that meant, but he sensed Sam was right. Yeah, we don't have time for that. It gets better, Sam said. It's better as you get better. Degraff could attack at any moment, but the fight might go on for years. Noah cringed at the thought. His world at war and Noah on the front lines. Sam got to his feet saying, "Let's get you back home." Noah stood and strapped on the backpack. "Take care of it." Then he winked it and added, "I want it back." Noah smiled because he didn't know what to say. Then he followed Sam toward the portal to his closet. As he made his way, he saw Mr. Darby sitting on the bottom steps of the staircase that led to the museum above. Dozens of fireflies were flying around him, points of blinking light in the dim space. A few were resting on his velvet jacket. He was frowning and looking worried. Noah wasn't sure if he was upset about Noah coming to the secret zoo, Degraff, or something else entirely. He looked strange without his usual smile. Fake. Noah stopped and said, "Mr. Darby, you okay?" "You're not at home," the old man said. I'm headed that way." Mr. Darby's gaze shifted to the canvas bag on Noah's back. "Not a bad idea, if you can manage it. Can you?" I think so." Noah realized that Mr. Darby was holding something. A photograph. "Who's in the picture?" Noah tried to see for himself, but couldn't. Mr. Darby looked at the photo in his grasp. Seconds passed. Just when it seemed he wouldn't answer, his frown deepened, and he said, "Someone very dear to me." Noah had no idea who he was talking about. He became curious about the stairway and all the fireflies. What's up there?" Mr. Darby glanced over his shoulder. Then he looked back to Noah and simply said, "The truth." Noah waited for more, but nothing came. After a few seconds, a hand suddenly dropped on his shoulder, and he turned to see Sam. "Come on," the descender said. "Let's deal with the truth another day." Noah nodded. Then he adjusted Tameron's backpack and followed Sam across the basement. A voice rose up from behind them. "Assuming there is another day." As Noah continued to walk, it terrified him to know that such a desperate thought had come from the leader of the secret zoo. Noah set Tameron's pack on the floor and then softly walked to his bedroom door. He peeked into the hall. The door to his parents' room was shut, and their lights were out. They were asleep. If they checked on him, the mirage had worked. He walked back across his room and put his arm on the mattress so the chameleons now would know to crawl onto his body and back into his pocket. When he could no longer feel the patter of their feet, he knocked the pile of the clothes to the floor and dropped into bed, the muscles already aching. Sam sat on Noah's desk and quietly said, "You got anything to eat?" "Drawer," Noah whispered, and it must have been obvious that he meant the desk drawer because it noisily slid open, and then Noah heard the crinkle of a granola bar wrapper. "Want one?" Noah did, but he was too tired to chew. Sam nodded towards Tameron's backpack. "Take it with you, everywhere you go, especially school. It'll fill in your locker, right?" Noah nodded. The side of his face pressed against the mattress. "You'll need the protection all the time now." Noah imagined himself using Tameron's tail to fight off a group of Sasquatches on Jenkins Street. The idea was terrifying. A noise suddenly rose in his ear. A woman's voice. "I got something on the northeast end of..." "Wait, never mind." At first, Noah thought he'd imagined the voice. But then he remembered his headset. On the other side of the portal, it hadn't worked to communicate with the sacred citizens in his neighborhood. "Take it out," Sam said. "Get some rest." "But you—" "I'll be fine," Sam said. He touched his ear and added, "I'm used to this thing." "Will you sleep?" Sam took the last bite of the granola bar and dropped the wrapper into Noah's wastebasket. "Some," he said. "Descenders have to stay quiet on the airways when people need to sleep." "I'll never relax," Noah said. "You don't need to relax. You just need to sleep." The image of Sam began to blur, and Noah realized his eyes were closing. The room went dark. Noah felt his heartbeat slow, and then his breathing became calm and rhythmic. Within seconds, he fell asleep. In his dream, he battled Degraff in the city of species while people stood by, cheering. Noah attacked with his tail, knocking the shadows through brick buildings and marble fountains, and Solana stood in the crowd, cheering louder than anyone else. Chapter 6. Trouble in Class. "I can't believe this is happening," Ella said. She pointed to the backpack Noah carried and added, "And I can't believe you're wearing that thing to school." Noah rolled his shoulders to adjust Tameron's weighty pack and said, "Sam told me to." The scouts had met up on their way to the walking to school. They were groggy and anxious, fearful that Degraff might attack at any moment. All of them were wearing their Specter pants. When Clarksville Elementary came into sight, Richie said, "Why do I have a feeling this could be a very short day?" The scouts walked up to the concrete path to their school and pushed through the entrance doors. They stopped by Noah's locker first. Tameron's backpack fit, but barely. As they started to walk off, someone came up from behind them and shoved Richie against the lockers. Walt. His cronies, Dave and Doug, were with him. Steel clanged, and Richie almost fell to the floor. "Knock it off, jerk," Ella said. She took a step forward, but Noah jumped in between her and Walt, who turned their way. Walt took a few steps forward and practically pushed his chest against Noah's. "And what are you gonna do?" "You're such an idiot," Noah said. "And what did you do to my friends?" "That was more than just bullying. That was assault." Walt's hard stare softened as his extra-wide shoulders slumped a bit. Noah could see that Walt knew he was right. Walt had recently decked Richie and dumped out Ella's backpack, which was more than everyday schoolyard bullying. "Break it up, boys," someone hollered, and Noah glanced over to see Mrs. Walker standing out just outside her classroom door, her hands planted on her hips. Walt sneered at Noah, returning to his typical self. Then he swung around and headed down the hall, his shoulders swaying. "Come on," Ella said as she started to walk off, pulling Noah by the sleeve. "We've got enough problems right now." The first bell rang, which meant students had 3 minutes to get to class. At his locker, Richie spun through his combination and opened the door. He started to hang his jacket, and then he suddenly jumped back. "What's wrong?" Ella asked. Instead of waiting for a response, Noah pulled open the door and looked inside. A large cobweb hung in one corner, and in the middle of it was a big spider with long spiny legs and a bulbous body. Not a tarantula, but just as bad, because it was a creature from the secret zoo, and it looked dangerous. Megan peered over Richie's shoulder. "Okay," Richie said. "There are at least 300 lockers in this school. I'm guessing this isn't the only one with a surprise inside." "Yeah," Ella said. "Looks like we didn't get all the spiders." The nervous spider crawled as far as it could into the corner. "What do we do?" Megan asked. The second bell rang, and Richie jumped again. "We go to class. We hope for the best, but expect the worst. And we keep an eye out for the possible portals, like Mr. Darby said." Megan could barely concentrate on what Mrs. Simmons, her math teacher, said as she crossed out numbers on the whiteboard and arranged them in fancy ways. All her thoughts were on the secret zoo and what was happening in Clarksville. When she heard Jessica Hunter whisper, "Big spider," to someone, she leaned closer to the conversation to hear. It seemed Jessica, like Richie, had found something in her locker. Megan impatiently tapped her toe and watched the second hand on the clock slowly sweep around. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Every once in a while she glanced at Ella, who sat a few rows over in her split-grade class. Her best friend seemed just as nervous as she was. At some point, Mrs. Simmons wiped an eraser across the board and started a new math question. As Megan absently watched the numbers appear, she noticed something. The whiteboard had a metal frame that protruded about an inch from the wall, and 5 or 6 thin objects that resembled teeth of a comb were sticking out of the gap. She focused her gaze. After a couple minutes, the objects moved a few inches in one direction, and 3 or 4 new ones appeared. Her insides dropped as she realized she was looking at the legs of an enormous insect, a creature from the secret zoo. Something other than a spider, it seemed, was crawling in the narrow space between the whiteboard frame and the wall. Ella was still staring blankly into space, clearly lost in her own thoughts. "Ella," Megan just above a whispered. "Ella." No response. Behind the whiteboard, the legs inched forward. Whatever was behind the metal frame wasn't going to stay a secret for long. Megan jumped to her feet and did her best to look casual as she walked to the front of the class. Mrs. Simmons paused at the direction, then resumed teaching. Megan swiped the bathroom pass off her teacher's desk and headed for the door, shooting Ella a worried look on the way. In the hall, she found an empty bathroom. Inside, she opened a pocket on her Specter pants, and chameleons began to crawl out onto her body. She felt the patter and prick of her feet along her legs, her torso, and her arms. The chameleon's colors began to swirl and blur, and within seconds, Megan was blended into the world around her. She peeked out the bathroom door, saw no one, and then slipped into the hall. Then she ran back to her class and paused outside the open door to look herself over. Perfectly camouflaged, she stepped into the room. Mrs. Simmons was calling on students, asking for input in solving an equation on the board. Ella was staring out into the hall, clearly worried about Megan. Ella couldn't see her, and that meant no one could. Megan silently walked to the front of the class. More of the legs of the insect, whatever it was, were showing now. It didn't look like the other students in the room had noticed. She slowly walked to the board. Seconds later, she was behind the long desk at the front of the class, her teacher only a few steps away. If she could get a small chameleon to latch onto the insect, the chameleon would know to camouflage it. Then Megan could grab both creatures and take them out of the room. "Who else has an idea?" Mrs. Simmons asked, and it seemed like she was responding to Megan's thoughts. In the back of the room, Peter Ryan raised his hand. "Yes, Peter," Mrs. Simmons said. As she turned and took a step toward Peter, Megan slipped in behind her. She grabbed a tiny chameleon off her shoulder, reached for the top of the whiteboard, and panicked with her hand stopped a few inches short. She stood on the tips of her toes and stretched as far as she could. It wasn't enough. "That's possible, Peter," Mrs. Simmons said. "Can you explain yourself a bit?" Her teacher hadn't taken a step away from her desk. The students who weren't staring off into space were scribbling on their papers, either doodling or taking notes. Megan noticed Mrs. Simmons' padded chair, which sat on 5 rollers. If she could get it closer to the wall, she might be able to stand on it and reach the top of the whiteboard. She grabbed the chair and slowly rolled it back a few inches. She paused and watched the class. No one had noticed. She rolled it back a few more inches and then a few more. Mrs. Simmons had walked over to Peter, who was now pointing out something in his textbook. Megan stopped rolling the chair when the back of it touched the wall. "Go," a voice inside her said. She carefully stood on the chair, and faced the whiteboard. She could now see most of the creature. It had dozens of orange legs and a brown segmented body. It wasn't an insect. It was an arthropod, a giant centipede, and the scouts had had encounters with them before. Wondering how it had gotten behind the whiteboard, Megan looked around until she saw a wide crack in the ceiling tile. At some point before class, the centipede must have fallen through and landed on the whiteboard, and now it couldn't get down. "That's close, Peter," Mrs. Simmons said, "but let me show you something." Mrs. Simmons was walking to the front of the room. Megan reached out and dropped the chameleon on the centipede, which quickly began to disappear. The centipede, still barely visible, squirmed and fell off the whiteboard, the chameleon clinging to its back. Megan instinctively reached for the creatures, but she lost her balance, and then the chair rolled out from beneath her, crashing into the teacher's desk. Mrs. Simmons stopped in mid-sentence, and then the room fell silent. Megan lay on the floor, her side aching and her heart racing. To her left was the wall with the whiteboard, and to her right were the desks of the rows of the first row of students. She glanced up and saw the worried expressions of Quinn Newbert, Tina Gardner, and Stella DL. The sixth graders were staring at Mrs. Simmons' chair as if it had just rolled off a spaceship. Megan noticed a ghostly shape in the front of the wall. The chameleon had fallen off the centipede, which was now slowly coming out of its camouflage. "Who did that?" Mrs. Simmons said, and Megan realized she was talking about her chair. Before the centipede could come into full view, the chameleon pounced on it, blending it back into its surroundings. Quinn stared in Megan's direction, his eyes wide and his jaw hanging open. He glanced at Tina and Stella and said, "Did you see that?" But the girls were focused on Mrs. Simmons, who was still trying to figure out who had kicked her chair. Megan got up as quietly as she could and grabbed the centipede by pinching a spot behind its head. Then she quickly walked out of the room and stood in the hall, unsure of what to do. Could she hide the centipede somewhere? Her locker? If she could get a portal to the secret zoo... Any idea struck her. A portal! She remembered how the scouts had used their specter pants to drain the water out of the barricaded hallway in the secret creepy critters. Her pockets connected to the secret zoo. The hall was empty. She opened the big zipper on the right leg of her pants, and the chameleons raced into her pocket. She dropped the centipede, and the chameleon on its back, in with them. Within seconds, the patter and pull of the little feet stopped, and Megan's camouflage was gone. Still, no one was around. She touched the transmit button on her tiny earpiece and softly said, "Evie." After a few seconds, Evie's voice rose in her ear. "Yeah?" "I need you at school. Bring the Specters. All of them." A pause, and then Evie's voice again. "We're on our way. Full camo?" "Yeah," Megan said. "And be ready to use your pockets to send some animals to the secret zoo." "You got it," Evie said, and then the radio waves went silent. Megan adjusted her clothes. A pull here, a tug there. Then she fluffed up her pigtails, took out her hall pass, and walked back into the classroom. Mrs. Simmons was standing in front of the whiteboard, scowling at the group. A few students near her desk were nervously accusing one another. In the front row, Quinn was leaning towards Stella, saying something and pointing to the floor. Megan strolled up to the scene, pretending to be confused by the commotion. And she set the hall pass on Mrs. Simmons' desk and said, "Did I miss something?" to anyone who might be listening. As she walked to her seat, she noticed Ella, who'd raised an eyebrow at her in a curious way. And I'll stop the video there, ending chapter 6. But I hope you guys enjoyed the read aloud today, and I look forward to seeing you in our continuation of The Secret Zoo, the final fight, and where we'll be continuing with chapter 7. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please take good care of yourselves and be safe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.